Hello, everybody. My name's James. Welcome to the Planet FPL People's Poll podcast. And the winner of the vote this week, as voted on Twitter overnight on Sunday, was the idea of predicting Pep. How can we understand what Pep is going to try and do before he actually does it? A bit of a headache for fantasy managers, but also interesting from a tactical perspective. And I knew exactly the person I was going to have on the podcast if this won the vote. And it did. Let me introduce you to Luke Williams, aka Disable. How are you, Luke?
I'm good, mate. I'm trying to morph into Pep as we speak, trying to get more and more bold. It's hopefully get my accuracy up.
I think I'm going more pep than you at the moment, mate. To be honest, you've got a little bit of catching up to do. For those who live under the rock, who are you, mate?
Yeah, Luke, I was on Fantasy Football Scout for many, many years back in the day, run mostly the Sky game, little bits of FPL here and there, and decided in recent years just to become more niche and give myself a little bit of a challenge and try and predict the bold man. So I wasn't really having it essentially at work and on Twitter when people were telling me that we just can't have these players from maybe not so much this season, but in the past sort of 4 or 5 seasons, the best team in the league by quite a way, hitting 100-point seasons and all sorts. And they were just like you can't pick any of their players. And I was like, nah, there must be some method in the madness here. So I gave myself a little challenge because that's what I do. And I've been doing it pretty much ever since. So yeah, that's what I do these days. Less pods.
Basically, the challenge started because you're a bit of a rebel, basically.
Pretty
You,
much.
you wanted to find a way to make it work.
Absolutely, yeah. That's pretty much it. I don't like being told that something can't happen or it doesn't happen. I think, oh, maybe it can. And yeah, I think I've done pretty well in some areas on it, but I do respect what people say. It's without doubt a minefield trying to pick a Man City team, and I'd say if anything, it's got a lot more difficult this recent season than past because, I mean, for one, you have to predict which defender is going to play now, which wasn't really a thing in the past. It was more just looking at their front line, whereas these days, different systems are popping their heads up even more than usual. And there's a whole host of defenders, as you know, with the added Akanji. And then we've got departures from Cancelo, which has lost a lot of setups for them. So yeah, it's got even more difficult. Sometimes I really wish I hadn't bothered. I'll be honest with you.
It's started now, so you got to finish, mate.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm on Twitter. I'm like, do I want to predict the team this week? I don't know if I can be bothered, but no, I always find a way to get it out there eventually.
I should timestamp this. It's in the morning of Tuesday, February the 28th. City are scheduled to play at Bristol City in the FA Cup tonight. But I suspect this is a podcast people might come back to. So just to make people aware of that. Do you ever go into weeks exactly what you just said there and think, I don't want to do it this week because I really don't know?
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. I wouldn't even say it's because I don't know. I would just say that it's a lot more difficult. So the chances of success are a lot harder, especially when, I mean, like we alluded to at the beginning, I like to focus on what I think Pep will do tactically, but there's a lot of information we also don't have at our hands. The medical information from the players for one. Do they need a rest or not? Are they back? They're back in training for a day or two after an injury. Does that mean they're available to start? Well, I can't know that. So that can have a massive impact. As I'm sure we'll talk about. Pep's system is very much a system, and he is focused on that particular game and what players will be in what areas at that time. Now, if you get one player wrong in that setup, it can have a knock-on effect. I think a perfect example is actually this week where I had a pretty bad week for me. I got 8 out of 11 this week. My main sort of thought process was, is he going to start Bernardo Silva or Rico Lewis in midfield? When I say midfield, it's the inverted fullback rule. Either one of those can play it. Bernardo Silva had a lot of minutes in a row, Champions League, everything. I thought, they've got the cup afterwards, home to Bournemouth. I think you want to dominate them. I'll go for Bernardo Silva. Now, Rico Lewis actually played it instead. And as a result, I think they had a knock-on effect. So you therefore lose a bit of build-up because as good as Rico Lewis is, he's not Bernardo Silva. And that's no criticism of him. Bernardo Silva is just obviously world-class. So Akanji probably came in at the back to help with build-up a little bit because otherwise then you're left with Ake, Diaz and Walker at the back. And I don't think that's the best setup for a Bournemouth game. So that'll have a knock-on effect where Akanji will probably come in to assist there. So that's 2 players down if you got one wrong straight away. So it's stuff like that you have to factor in where you can be very, very close on what Pep was going to do for that week and even look at the team and the setup and think, do you know what? I got that bang on, but I've actually only got 8 out of 11 players, if that makes sense as a result.
You're normally about 10 out of 11. Normally, I think that's how you track on average, isn't it?
Yeah, so I've got this is last season. So Emma at Jump the Wave that I'm sure people are familiar with. If they're not, they should follow her because she does fantastic work grouping fans' opinions, season ticket holders, people who've been excellent predictors in the past and tracks against multiple teams, not just Man City. But last season it was focused on Man City and she took over tracking from me after I just started rogue on my own. She I sort of became aware of it and she took over from me. Yeah, I ended up getting 9.4 out of 10. Because we dropped the goalkeeper, because for
Yeah.
obvious reasons, across the season. So on average, yeah, I was hitting 9, 10, sometimes 8, maybe, etc. across the whole season, and it ended up being the best of all predictors. So yeah, really happy with that. I don't think I'm doing as well this year. I think it's around between 9 and 9.4, a little bit of a dip, but I'll just talk to the reasons why it's quite hard this season. And there's a few people around me as well that are doing well. I think I'm still around sort of the top 3 or 4 predictors at the moment, but a long way to go. Yeah, so hopefully it's still doing okay, but I want to do better. So we'll see.
Well, listen, you're never going to be 10 out of 10 every week, mate. I think we'd acknowledge that's impossible for any team, even take an Arsenal, who are kind of regularly going to got a core team that doesn't change as much as Pep does. A lot of people on the outside will think that's phenomenal, mate, because there's no way I predict a City team every week. There's no way I'm getting a number as high as you are in terms of your predictions. So when you're starting the process, if you're looking at, say, they're playing Newcastle this weekend, as an
Mhm.
example, how do you start the process of trying to work out? And I realize obviously they haven't even played tonight against Bristol City, which confuses that matter. But is there something principally you say, right, Newcastle do this, so I think City want to do this? Does that help with your prediction?
Pretty much. I think that's the main thing, and why most fantasy managers go a little bit array on Pep is they struggle with the fact that a player might be in form, for example, so they think he should play again, and they also struggle with he played 3 days ago, 90 minutes, so he's unlikely to play this week. Those things are factors, but I don't think they're the principal factor. I think the principal factor, and Pep, I mean, I go from what I'm not saying any of this is fact by any means. I could have an element of luck in what I'm doing, but I think Pep himself says that he plays the players for the occasion, for that match. He looks at the opponent. He's a manager that very heavily focuses on tactics and the setup, and that is always his principal go-to. So I think he'll look at the match and he'll say, how am I going to beat these players, this team? Where is the space on the pitch? And what kind of defending do I need? Do I need box to box defending? Do I need build up from the back? Do I need runners in midfield? All of those things go through his mind, and I think he'll then have the setup of how he wants to set up and play, which will give you a formation. In most scenarios, at the moment, it is the go-to formation, like you said, of the 3-2-2-3 or the 5 back, 5 forward, as it's known through some of the City forums and stuff. And that's probably how he will set up versus Newcastle. And then I think the other things then start to come into play. Okay, who are my guys at the moment that are bang at it, and then he'll try to put them in, and then maybe after that he'll look at minutes. Sometimes minutes has to be a thing. Like I say, we don't have access to that information, but I think more often than not, you'll find that the rests that Pep gives are usually in and around the Champions League, like the game before, the game after a Champions League. That's where the accuracy, and we know this because it's not just me. Remember, there's multiple other people in these predictors groups, and when we look back at the stats of the Man City predictors, historically, we see the most inaccuracies around a Champions League game, which means that there's an element of randomness put into it. So I completely respect that. But outside of those games, usually it comes down to the tactics. And like I say, you can get very, very close, but have 2 or 3 players wrong based on luck. I go into that week saying, oh, Rico Silva, Bernardo Silva was basically a 50-50 in my head. 1 week I might pick a Silva, one week I might pick Rico, and I might end up with 11 or end up on 8. So there is an element of luck in it as well. But yeah, it's definitely a tactical setup with Pep first, in my mind.
If you take that game at the weekend against Newcastle, obviously we've got Bristol City tonight. It's 4 days to Newcastle, and then no midweek fixture next week. So there should be no external factors other than what we can't see. Someone's picked up an injury or something like that. Other than he picks the team that he thinks is best for that one particular fixture. So if you're predicting a City team against Newcastle, do you start down the spine and go, right, Edison, Rodri, Haaland, definites, unquestionable?
Pretty much. So I think my process will often be, first of all, I'll look at the game last time when they played Newcastle. If it's against the same manager, then Pep usually, especially if it went well, looks to do quite similar in most scenarios. Now I have to bear in mind when I look back at that game, who was out, who was in form at the time. There's other factors you have to mention, have to think about at that time as well. But it's generally a pretty good guide. And with some teams, you can actually look back 3, 4, 5 games, and you'll see quite often a pattern that we'll like to use. Now, we know that this season he's changed the way that Man City play, and that's why that's not as useful as it has been in the past. Like in previous seasons, that was quite commonly they would use like 10 of the same 11. Whereas this season, with this new setup with the inverted fullback, it's not exactly the same. But I think because Newcastle play with a back four, generally he's played that 3-2-2-3 setup. So that's what I would start with. I think that's probably most likely that he'll play with that. You know, like you say, Edison, Rodri, you know, these are pretty much nailed on. I'd say Gundogan, which I've said quite a few weeks ago now, is pretty crucial to the system, the way they're playing at the moment as that second striker. He's pretty much I actually think Foden could do it really well, and maybe we might see
Agreed.
that now. It might be that we see that, given the way that Foden has come back in and started to play well. I think they need goals in the team, and I really think if Foden was to play that Gundogan role, he could be ridiculously good at it, and it would be a way to get Grealish, Mahrez, and Foden all in the same team. So we'll hang fire on that. But as of pretty much the World Cup or even beforehand, Gundogan playing that second striker role has been pretty damn good. So I think he would play in most scenarios. You would fit him. Grealish is pretty much a lock at the moment. Like
7 league starts in a row.
Yeah, he keeps beating him up. He serves in this setup. He's just so key in the fact that we all know what Grealish offers. Right, he holds the ball extremely well. He gives them tempo. He gives them control, and that's the buzzword for Pep. Control has gone to ridiculous levels now. Ironically, I actually think if you look at the Arsenal-Leicester game, where Leicester had like no shots on goal, was it? And Arsenal just dominated the game. That's basically Pep's wet dream. Like what happened there? It's pretty much like maybe even just like a 2. I mean, the score's irrelevant. Obviously, you take 8-0 if it was a possibility, but that kind of thing where you completely smother the opponent. They have no chance to even have an effort on goal, win 1 or 2-0. You know, he keeps repeating, the faster you attack, the faster your opponents will attack against you. So he really wants to control the whole game. I think personally that's gone a little bit too far, and as a result, you know, his more vertical players, as he calls them, so Foden is definitely one of them, De Bruyne, have ended up missing out here and there as a result. But I think he's starting to maybe reintroduce them. It's probably too early to say, because Bournemouth is, I mean, on paper, the easiest game in the entire league for you to play your more vertical players. There's barely any threat at all from them, isn't there? Right, so it's quite easy to throw a Foden in there after a Champions League, and he performed very, very well. But I think he needs to start bringing these guys back, because you can't just rely on Haaland for the goals. I think if you do play the games like he has been, just pure control over the entire 11, rely on a couple of moments of magic, or Haaland just to get his end on one of the 7 touches he gets in a game, is not enough. I feel like he needs to bring the goals back into the team, and pretty much the only player in the team I think who can offer that really, that little bit of chaos in that second striker role, is Foden. So I think we will start to see him come back in game soon. It could be as soon as Newcastle.
Can you just elaborate what you mean by vertical players?
It's players who will just go up and down the pitch very, very quickly. So they'll receive the ball and they'll turn and they'll look straight forward instantly. They'll go 100 miles an hour. You know, he talks about pausa or whatever it is. I don't know if that's the direct translation. I think it's a Spanish term, but essentially it's just taking time on the ball and taking extra touches to control it. So Grealish, Mahrez, people like that will receive the ball and they won't necessarily go and try and beat their man straight away. They'll hold the ball up, they'll slow it down a bit. Maybe they'll try and beat him, maybe they'll cut back, they'll play it back into the midfield. They'll keep hold of the ball. That was very useful during the period where Man City's defense was all over the place. They had a lot of their centre backs out, because it helps them to defend from the front. Foden, being more vertical, will get the ball, spin on it, and instantly look for that through ball or that line breaking pass, or go past someone, or just bear down on goal straight away. He's 100 miles an hour, so he's more of a vertical player up and down the pitch. That's the way, rather than sideways, I guess.
With Haaland, a lot of people will be beginning to think, I think as we get later in the season, perhaps those who haven't used their triple captaincy yet, thinking, I want that Haaland double later, and there's every chance that you may get it. Oh, is there a period where you get overly concerned with him that he might not play? Or is it a case of if he's fit, he's going to play, do you think?
I mean, it's been that way so far, but I would suggest that we can only really use what we had in seasons gone past, and that's it. If Man City do make it to the Champions League semi-finals, finals, maybe even the quarters, he has been known to rest his players, even if the league is in the balance. I think if you can cast your mind back to last season, I think there was games versus Leeds, I can't remember who else, maybe Watford. There was certainly like a cup final, maybe even versus Liverpool, where he literally played. They were still in the fight for the title. It was still extremely close. Any points dropped could have caused them to not win the title. And he changed multiple players all over the place. So I don't think he'll hesitate to do it again. If we get to I still believe that the Champions League is the top priority for Man City. I think most people think that from the club's perspective anyway. I think all the clubs are a priority, don't get me wrong, but I think they really want to win that one. And I do think if we get to a situation where it's Champions League semis and finals, that you might see Haaland rested. Now, I haven't looked at the fixtures like you have, but 34, 37 doubles, I don't know if the Champions League falls around there. But if it does, and there's easy games, from memory, I think it might have been Everton. I haven't looked at it for a while, but I think it was Everton was around there. Then I think you run the risk. I think you run the risk that you might not play him.
It's a dangerous ground here, but let's say that if City did make the FA Cup semi-finals, therefore, you're probably looking at you would be looking at a semi-final on the weekend of 32.
Right.
Arsenal at home on the Wednesday in the Premier League. So I think semi-final rotation possibly quite likely in the build-up for that. Then it's Fulham the following Sunday. Then you've got probably West Ham at home in the midweek before Leeds at home at the weekend. And we don't know at that point what day the Leeds game will be yet, although there's every chance it may be a Sunday, depending on the King's coronation, for example. Then the midweek afterwards, Champions League restarts. So if they've made it that far to the semi-finals, you've got Champions League semi-final, Everton away 36, Champions League semi-final. So you look at that, wouldn't you? Everton away, and he'd probably look at it and go, I'll pick whatever I want here, basically.
Yeah,
I think at that point, does it become incredibly murky for you to try and predict the team, basically?
Absolutely. It becomes incredibly murky. I think going on last season, it might just be coincidence, but nearly every time they had like a decent Champions League game, they had a very easy home game just before it. So the pattern was the game before Champions League, you would often rest a few names. Now that might just be the circumstance of the fact that the fixtures fell that way. When you actually listen to Pep, he says, when the games are close and we have to travel a lot and we have to travel all over the place, it's worse for the recovery of players. So that suggests more likely after games, like we just saw 4 away games recently and then they rested a few against Bournemouth. So I think that would actually be his preference, and it just depends a little bit how the fixtures fell. There with home Leeds before and away Everton in between, you could argue either of those, right? I think either of those could see some rotation. If the first leg of the Champions League was away as well, I think you're more likely to see the rest of the rotation come in the gap in between. It makes sense, right? Keep them fresh for the 2 games. So that would worry me. If that's in a double game week, I presume it would be. If it's midweek in there, then I would worry around them. It's probably a little bit too soon to say. We don't know. He could be injured by then, right? But that would be my gut feel right now.
Okay. So going back to the present and the now, what role does Alvarez have in this? Because I think a lot of people are probably he's Haaland's backup, but he's not, is he? When is he playing and when isn't? Because it feels like there's a little bit of a pattern emerging.
Yeah, and it's been a pattern that, to be fair, we picked up on quite early. Essentially, Pep told us, he doesn't always just lie like people say. He says they can play together. I want them to play together when we need an extra body in the box, basically against a low block when there's a team that defends incredibly deep and it's just got numbers all over the place. He wants those extra bodies in the box. He just wants the extra bodies in the front line, to be fair. He wants bodies to stretch the team out wide and then find the gaps in the box and support Haaland. Obviously, Haaland then ends up occupied by 2 centre-backs, sometimes 3 centre-backs, sometimes a DM as well. So he wants that extra assistance. And Alvarez's main role all season has pretty much been to sub in for either Haaland if he's out injured or De Bruyne. We've seen it usually versus back fives because by nature there's extra bodies at the back straight away, but it's not always. I mean, Bournemouth didn't play a back 5 this week. I don't think they played a back 4. Oh, they did play a back 5, did they?
Back 5,
yeah. So the thing with Pep there, he may not have known they would play a back 5, right? They've been playing a lot of a back 4 recently, so I think he just set up with the nature that they were going to defend really deep. It's pretty obvious Bournemouth are going to play that way regardless. They ended up playing a 5 or a 4, but Alvarez suits that game, essentially. I think back 5s are an obvious one where Alvarez will come in for De Bruyne, and I think against deep blocks he will feature. We must add that caveat that De Bruyne was obviously a little bit sick as well, so that could have played into the thinking there, but as well. But yeah, I think you see it more often. It's what I said before about the vertical players and the pauser players. I mean, De Bruyne's probably been a source of frustration for a lot of fantasy managers this season. I think De Bruyne's a little bit of a different player in this role. You know, he's actually like a player more of moments. He has like fantastic moments in the game as usual because he's absolutely world class, as we all know. So he'll put in that absolute beautiful perler of a ball, or he'll score that world class goal every now and then from like he did the other week from outside the box. But in games where the teams sit extremely deep, his use isn't as much. It's more about having Alvarez and that body to cause them issues. De Bruyne is much better as a transition player, in my opinion, a vertical player when the game's back and forward. So against equal opposition, you know, say you're playing Arsenal or something, De Bruyne's like a no-brainer. He'll be in there 100% because it'll be up and down the pitch. He's got those moments of qualities. You know, Alvarez wouldn't offer the same. When you're playing the easier games, Alvarez has got more of a chance of playing, and that's a problem for an asset, isn't it? For a fantasy manager who costs that much money, as good as he is, we know he doesn't get that many goals. But then if you take some of the easier games away from him as well, suddenly it makes him a pretty poor option.
That's interesting. I've called him Big Game Kev for a number of years, and actually, other than the goal against Arsenal in many of these big games, he hasn't returned over this recent period since the World Cup. But there is some logic in definitely what you're saying there about actually the more open a game is, i.e., perhaps the better the opponent, the more likely Kevin De Bruyne's gonna play. But to flip that on its head, Luke, quite often I look at certain games and think, right, you're playing against a real kind of defense narrow type block. Who's the one player on the pitch that's likely to open it up? It's Kevin De Bruyne, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. He'll have that moment in the game and he probably will get an assist in it. But I think is it worth, I don't want to say carrying him because that's offensive, but his use is questionable for a large part of that game. You'll see him not have anywhere near as many touches as he used to. He'll be sort of floating around the striker, not offering as much. He doesn't get into the box, and that's what Pep wants. He wants the Alvarez or the Foden chaos that drives into the box and causes those players to go further deep and run with those guys. And De Bruyne doesn't do that. He'll get the ball, he'll turn, and then he'll look up, and then all of the guys are marked, right? So it literally does take a Kevin De Bruyne special to find that person, which he can do. But Pep doesn't want that. He wants the players running all in and around the box, so therefore he ends up dropping him. You know, I think actually the best setup would be versus a low block personally would be what we just talked about, to have Gundogan and Foden as the eights. I mean, or Alvarez and Foden as the two eights alongside Haaland with the two wingers, and just drop him entirely. I think that would just be pure chaos because I think the back line's got the ability to hold the ball fine now, especially when they've got Laporte, Diaz. You know, Stones is coming back as well. I think if you have a back three of Laporte on the left side, Diaz in the centre, and Stones on the right side, it's pretty much a cheat code. Like those guys are just unbelievable in all areas, but especially on the ball. And you have Rodri and Bernardo Silva just in front of them. That five would be as good as, you know, any six in build up across the league. So we can almost cheat the system, have less players back there that are better, and then have more in the front line. So I think that's where he ultimately wants to go.
So focusing on some of the defensive selections, how do you mentioned about some people being better on the ball, the way to carry it out, distribution. How do you go about in your thinking again for this game against Newcastle coming up? We probably don't have to, with the caveat, we don't know what's happened at Bristol City tonight, but with how do you go about predicting what that likely backline is going to be? Are you influenced by thinking, right, Newcastle probably play St. Maximin, he wants to play Kyle Walker, but I recall last year Cancelo playing right back against St. Maximin to try and drive him backwards, and actually City got a goal playing the ball left diagonally to right with Cancelo getting behind St. Maximin.
Yeah.
So how do you go about predicting that?
Well, it's tough, but you touched on it there. I don't think that Pep really thinks of too much anyway the player that he's playing against, like what we do historically. Like we would say Kyle Walker versus St. Maximin because they're both fast and he can track him back. Whereas I think in Pep's mind, if you've got, say, a Stones there and you don't give the ball away in the first place because his ability to hold the ball is so good, you've put out the fire before it started. You've literally, as long as he doesn't get the ball in the game and break on him, then you're fine. It's rather to stop it at source rather than have to worry and panic and have Walker run back afterwards. So that is in his mind. I recall as well, Newcastle, I think they tore him apart, didn't they? St. Maximin absolutely tore Walker apart last time we played him. I think he ended up getting subbed off as well. I could be wrong, but I seem to remember him being horrendous in one of those games. Having said that, in this new setup, I think there's things that we will have to guess, right? And this is where I'm not Pep, right? And I'm not as good as him as knowing the other team. The classic example at the moment is Ake and Laporte. He keeps saying, I will play. There was even quotes that actually came out and confirmed it, which is great to hear because it's what I suspected. Laporte is used for build up and Ake is used to defend. It's actually quite strange because Ake's stats in terms of build-up and passing are actually really good. So we have to bear in mind as well, there'll be people listening going, oh, okay, well, statistically, Ake is actually pretty damn good in that area. I agree, but it's just how Pep sees them. So that would be the biggest, I think that would be the biggest decision this week versus Newcastle. And I wouldn't say that the midweek game versus Bristol City gives you any light here. You'll probably see people later say, oh, Ake started that one, or Laporte did, so that means the vice versa is safe for the Newcastle game. I don't believe that's the case. I believe that will be the hardest decision this week, because I think in a home game against Newcastle, I probably would err on the side of build up, and he would probably go for Laporte. But you could make a case for Ake quite conceivably, right? Because he's a great defender. Like you said, they have got pace out there. They've got Alma and they've got Saint Maximin. They've got other issues. So that's where an element of guesswork will come in. Outside that, I think the team's fairly secure. I'd be pretty confident in picking at least 9, 10 of the 11 this week. I think you will see Diaz and Walker at the back. I would replace Walker for Stones if he was fully available, but given he's just literally come back to training, maybe he won't be ready. That's one where Bristol City might give us a hint, right? If Stones was to start this game and then go off around 50, 55, 60 minutes, then maybe you'd think, okay, maybe they're prepping him for the Newcastle game. If that's not the case, then I think Walker will play there. And I think you'll see Bernardo Silva and Rodri in midfield, and they'll just look to dominate the game, especially in a home game. I think the only other one I'd slightly be worried about would be where does Foden fit in, if at all, and that would probably be for Mahrez.
So with Bernardo, that would presumably be this where we said kind of without the ball, he's got to chase into left back position.
Yeah.
Obviously on the ball, he's going into midfield left hand side of Rodri to create a double pivot in there. So under that, who do you would think would start? Is that Laporte or Ake therefore then?
See, it can be either, and we've seen it before. So against Arsenal, he used Ake there, and I think that was one of those ones where I think it's like the opponent was very much taking into consideration. Yeah, because he was so good against him in the League Cup. But I think if you look at Villa and Wolves offhand, he started with Laporte for the build-up, and he had Bernardo Silva as the inverted left back. So I think we'll probably see that again. Like I say, Ake Laporte's kind of 50-50 in my mind. That's where I almost want to throw it back to other people to go, well, what do you think Pep will prefer in this occasion? You think you prefer Ake for the defensive, or do you think Laporte for the build-up? Because I'm 50-50. What do you think? I think Bernardo Silva, Rodri will play. I think Diaz will play, and I think Walker will play / Stones if he's available, essentially. The rest of the team is pretty known.
Are you of the feeling at the moment then that Ake and Laporte can't or won't play together? Because in theory, you could have obviously Ake kind of like left back, Laporte inside of him, then say Diaz or Stones, and you play Lewis from the right hand side, who then comes in centrally. Can that work?
It can, but I believe I'm right in saying they've only started one game together all season, and it was in the League Cup. I think I'm right. So it seems very much it's either or.
You've just confirmed that they're both going to start on Saturday, haven't you?
Yeah, probably. But it can work. In that game, they were actually really good as well. I mean, for me, Ake can play the left centre back when more defensive, and Laporte can play that centre back role and spray the ball around. I don't see any reason why he can't. It's just it hasn't fallen that way, so it doesn't appear that Pep sees it that way. Yeah.
Okay, interestingly, Bernardo Silva we obviously touched on. I mean, the Arsenal game was a perfect example where he started the game for the first hour playing left back basically without the ball, because Arsenal had far more than what we'd be accustomed to against Manchester City. And then on the hour mark, he changed it up and he put Bernardo Silva to right wing. Why do you think at that moment that he took Mahrez off rather than just taking Bernardo off?
I mean, he came out and said that after that game, I think people were too hard up on the fact that he played Bernardo Silva as the inverted fullback, and then he said it wasn't. You saw after the game, he said it wasn't working, so I had to change it.
He blamed himself.
Yeah, and he blamed himself, right? And people took that to say, "Oh, that was because he played Bernardo Silva in that position." And he said, "No, it wasn't that position. It wasn't because of that. It was because our wingers were receiving the ball, coming too deep, and then coming inside, and that was causing them the issue." That's what he was said. So as a result, he asked Grealish to press in a slightly different way and push himself more up the wing. And Mahrez, he took off, who obviously wasn't happy. Mahrez's natural game is to stay wide, but then obviously end up coming deep and cutting in because he's so left-footed. So he took Mahrez off to bring Bernardo Silva up there and create some extra space, who's also left-footed, but just did a better job of it. So it wasn't even that. People focused on that. And I think there's actually been a comment since as well, confirming that he said it was because my wingers were coming in too deep, receiving the ball, cutting inside, and it was causing us problems. So we kind of freed it up by bringing Akanji on, and then he could bring Bernardo Silva, who's better at floating around the pitch from that role and going to where he needs him to be. He's obviously a master of doing whatever Pep tells him to do, essentially, in any role on the pitch. And it did work out, didn't it? Because as soon as that happened, I think Man City were far better team for the last 20 minutes. And then people were like, well, the Bernardo Silva experiment's over. And no, it wasn't. It was straight back again. Yeah.
So, presume as you can work this all out, mate, you've got 3 Man City players at the moment in FPL.
Well, this is the other thing. I can work it out fine, but then it might be a different plan for the week after. So we're still back to the same position where it's great being able to predict the team, but you need the guy who's going to play every single week. And we all know that there isn't really anyone who's also a fantasy option. I'll add in outside Haaland. It's quite tricky. Grealish, we did touch on. I think at the moment, certainly, he's in Pep's main team, and I can't see really any reason to bring him out. The fact that Foden's returned to form, and predominantly that has been his position, would be a slight worry, because Foden could now obviously just come in for Grealish any game. But it looks like he's finally taking it on board to play him on the right. You know, at the beginning of the season, there was a couple of games he played Foden on the right. It was quite sporadic. One of them was the hat-trick game he played, I think, versus, was it Man United? I can't remember who it was now, on the right wing. And he hadn't really done it since. Mahrez has been, the problem with Foden there is the fact that Mahrez come back in such good form, and he wants to keep Grealish. And now he's brought Foden back in on the right when he has brought him back in, and he's done well. So I think more now I'd worry about Mahrez than I would about Grealish. I think Foden Mahrez is more like a 50-50, depending on whether he wants the runner or control in a game. Outside the fact that Gundogan, like you, I think he could actually do a role there. So we're looking out for that, but I don't want to predict that ahead of time. I want to see that he actually does it first before I start saying it's a real possibility.
It feels like that Foden in sort of like a 10 position, if you will, or a high 8, almost feels like he'll do it in like the Champions League quarterfinal against Bayern Munich, doesn't it? Because that's how he is. Rather than going, I'm gonna try this against Bournemouth, for example.
Pretty much. I mean, he uses him in midfield in the League Cup all the time. So I'd expect we'll probably see that tonight versus Bristol City. I think there's a good chance we'll see Foden do that, and he's done really well doing that. He seems a little bit reluctant to do it in main games, but I think there's certain games where the Bournemouth game is perfect. He just shows you what he brings. He was so good in that game. Bournemouth couldn't let him go for any moment. He's all over the place. You know, they can't handle him, and he causes the chaos in the game that they miss when he's not in there. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to see. That's, I think, Pep's main challenge at the moment is how does he get Foden into that front 5 when Gundogan in the 8 has been fantastic. De Bruyne he wants to use there in most games. Haaland obviously up top, and then you've got Mahrez and Grealish either side. The obvious answer is for Mahrez at the moment, but I'm hopeful that maybe we'll see him in one of the 8 roles eventually.
Problem with Grealish is it's 7 starts in a row, and it's very decent value at 6.8. But the points aren't overly showing up. It's roughly about 4 points per game over those 7 games. Doesn't feel like doesn't feel like enough for someone who's getting regular starts for City. It might be that he's building to something, but I don't see anybody rushing to buy Jack Grealish currently.
No, honestly, I don't think it will ever get. I mean, it could get better for a period. We all know that players can go on a hot run. And I'm sure that will happen for Grealish at some point. I don't doubt that people say, oh, he's nailed and now he's scoring points, so I'll start bringing him in. But I don't really think it will ever get much better in this setup for Grealish. I think he will tick over like pretty good, especially if he's getting the games, but I'm not sure I will ever see him in this particular setup as a player who gets a massive amount of goals. You know, the assists, fair enough. I mean, at the end of the day, I think anyone can get assists in this team if you can just get lucky, can't you? Playing 3-yard pass to the right and someone hits a worldie, or Haaland just, it goes to Haaland. You can bang it in. But yeah, I don't really like Grealish much of an asset. I think he will be useful later in the season when you're looking at those double game weeks and stuff. Then you're like, okay, Grealish's got a very good chance of playing the game. So fair enough. It is about numbers in those game weeks as well. For me, the real midfielder to pick outside Foden becoming an explosion, which could happen at any point, is Gundogan, like I say, at the moment, just because I think he's going to play most of the game, be there good. He's really useful in the games where it's against poor opposition that sit deep, because he finds those lanes, those channels, and he ends up being that second striker alongside Haaland. And then he's also really good in the games where it's open for similar reasons. He finds that channel. Their whole game plan at the moment really is to pass the ball out wide to one of the wingers who hold the width really, really well. The fullbacks then push on to those wingers, and Haaland, who's occupying usually 2 centre halves, the 8s will then run into the gaps that they've created because they're holding such width. And that's why, the likes of Gundogan and then Kevin De Bruyne is not so good at finding those gaps, or Alvarez, whoever, will be found. And that's pretty much their game plan, to try and get goals at the moment. And it worked well. I think they did it against Bournemouth a couple of times. Foden found the channels really well.
Gundogan started the last 6 of the last 7. or 7 of the last 9, depending on how you want to look at it. Same thing, though. There's nothing much in there in terms of returns either.
No. I do think that can change. I do think he can get more. I think Gundogan has been getting goals and assists recently. I think nearly every game, right? If you're looking at there, he's picked up something in nearly every game, even if it's a little bit
He's
here or
got
there.
3 attacking returns since the World Cup. And there's only 3 games that he hasn't started. Assist at Arsenal, goal against Villa, and assist against Wolves. That's it.
Yeah. So there's some of the more recent games, I guess. I think I think he is useful, but we'll come back to the fact that because he's so important and he's 32 years old, once the Champions League starts, in and around those games, you'll probably see him bench because I can't see him not playing in the Champions League. So I think he'll be protected in and around them. So we're back to where we started again. Some of the best players will miss some of the more easy games sometimes. So, like we said before we started the pod, really you're looking at Haaland, obviously, and even he may be going in our setups, as you talked about the other day on your FPL pod, given the nature of the blanks, etc. And then outside of that, really, it's a bit of a punt everywhere else. I think Diaz is definitely a name that you can consider now. I think that he will play like in previous seasons. We used to have that reputation of turning up for every game for Man City. We see how important he has been for them since they've come back. There was a period where Diaz was a little bit shaky for maybe almost half a season, and it wasn't quite as nailed. But his impact has been fantastic. So I'd say Diaz, obviously Ederson's going to play every game. And Haaland are the ones, and they're going to play the vast majority of games. Outside that, you're looking at a punt pretty much on either Gundogan or one of the wingers.
Yeah, I think part of the reason I'm going to do this now is I don't think many people are going to be, there's going to be a number of people wildcard this week, and I think probably the only City player will be considered under that is Haaland.
Yeah, for good reason.
And there's good reason potentially to even go with none, as discussed previously. Let me give you a hypothetical, Luke. You wildcard in 33 and City are out of the Champions League. Got Arsenal at home and then double against Fulham, West Ham, then Leeds, Everton. Good run of fixtures. And probably every chance for another double in 37. If you wildcard at that point, you absolutely want 3 Man City. And I realise looking ahead forward sort of 6 weeks or so is quite difficult at the moment. But if you were in that moment now, what 3 City?
Well, Ederson's obvious the one, but I wouldn't really want to do that to myself again. It's been absolutely horrendous. I would go Diaz. I think it would be Diaz. I think he has got some goal threat as well from corners. They do get quite a significant amount of set pieces, or they should do, because they are obviously a better team than most people. Obviously Haaland. And then the third one, I think I want to say that by the time we get there, maybe Foden will be an option, but it's too early to say. So I wouldn't touch Mahrez or Foden because they're still most likely to play in that position on the right-hand side. So you're looking at one of Grealish or Gundogan. I would be tempted by Gundogan. I think Gundogan would be the better option, personally.
Yeah. Is Ederson one you'd never do that to yourself again?
Oh, I love pain. I'll come back again, I'm sure, at some point. I absolutely love it.
Did you not, in a way, that it's not mean to be critical of anyone, because I think we all do it. We all consider him because he is the one that I know is going to play. And, clean sheet, fine 6. And, if you can offer that every other week, 6-2, 6-2 for a goalkeeper, you probably take it. It's fine. But it's only ever that, isn't it?
That doesn't matter.
He's never going to get you the 9 or 10 pointers.
That doesn't matter though. People get hung up on that. That does not matter. At the end, we're not taking him for the whole season. The reason behind picking Ederson when we come back from the World Cup is they had good games and more games than everyone else, and he was the only player in the back line you could say would play every game.
Agreed.
And that all proved to be true. What didn't happen is they didn't get the clean sheets that they expected to get. They get 20 to 21, I think it looks at clean sheets every season since Pep's been there. Doesn't mean it's a nailed on thing, but that's what you would expect. That's what the bookies expect. So it doesn't matter if you don't get 15 or whatever points and then 2, 15, 15. If you are going to get 6, 6, 2, 6, 6, 2, 6, you'll have more points than the guy who gets 15, 1, 15, 2. And it's only like $1 million more. It's like, I think he's quite cheap compared to the rest of the keepers. It's only about 1.3.
It's absolutely brutal when they do shit like they did at the weekend against Bournemouth, though, and Nottingham Forest the week before.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's what it looks, when he doesn't get the clean sheet, it looks a horrendous decision, but we can't say they wouldn't get the clean sheet beforehand.
I'm not being critical. Like, I went big City defence in Sky, right? And it bit me on the arse so bad, including Ederson.
It's been horrendous. There's no two ways about it. But the point I'm making is I would make the decision with the same circumstances again to do it, because what we assumed to be correct, i.e. he's the only nailed person, they'd have extra games, all proved to be true. You've been in this game a long time and you know that's why, and that's why you did it in Sky, right? Because you've got that fixture advantage, you've got the games. It didn't work out. I'll be here again.
So in theory, you'd still consider him if you were on that wildcard 33, possibly.
Yeah, absolutely, I would. Yeah, I would consider him, because I try to not let the past affect. If anything, I'd go the other way and say, oh, they're not going to end the season on 8 clean sheets. That's just ridiculous. They're going to turn it up at some point and come from some fake background. They're going to make up for their negative
errors. Gamblers fallacy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Before we let you go, City's not your team. You're a gooner. Who do you think's winning this leg?
Not a gooner.
Are you not a gooner? Who do you support?
I've just got Alexander Hleb as my profile picture because I love him.
I thought you were a gooner.
No.
I'm sorry, mate, because that's one hell of an insult. If someone said that to me, I'd cut the call, mate.
Is that why you don't talk to me usually? Now I've worked out why.
I just ignore you, because Arsenal are doing too well.
No, mate, take that away. We can be friends now.
Are you United then?
Yeah, I was always. Well, it's a bit weird for me. I won't bore people too long. Essentially, at school, someone asked me who do they support, and it was my best friend next door who supported Man United. He said, "Who do you support?" I support Man United, and I was like, "Yeah, me too." Just because I wanted to act cool and be his friend. Luckily, he picked them because they were actually decent. If he'd have picked like Harchester United, I'd have been fucked. But
I don't know. They had some good stories, mate.
yeah. So that's how it started, and then obviously the third year, everything was good at school. Literally, you're about the same age as me, aren't you? Everyone at school I suppose maybe not in your area in London, but anywhere outside of London, every kid supported Man United. It was ridiculous. Like that's what we did. And then as I grew older, I realised, that's shambolic. That's a shambolic effort for me. So I'm just gonna not support anyone really. And my dad is a Villa supporter, and I've been to see Villa numerous times, usually versus Man United, sitting in the wrong end. So I kind of edge towards Villa now, to be honest, if anyone. But I don't really support anyone. Fantasy's taken over. So I like Villa. I like Man United.
I get a lot of stick from Villa fans just quickly. Do you think Emi Martinez world class?
I think he's a very good goalkeeper. I don't know if he's world class.
Cheers, mate. Who do you think win the leg then? Was going to be the original question.
Well, going back to who I really like of our era, right? That Pep team in Barcelona was the best team I've ever seen. And I really liked all that tiki-taki, Xavi, Iniesta, Messi in his prime. And that holds like a dear place in my heart. So that is why I've always gravitated towards watching Pep teams and enjoy watching them. So as much as I'm being a Man United fan on paper, I'd want to see Man City win it because I love Pep. And I don't like all this thing of he's overthinking and all that. Yes, occasionally he will do, but he's trying to create he's leading manager for me that tries to create. He doesn't just put 11 superstars out there and go do your thing like some managers do. And yes, that can work. He tries to construct it and come up with a system that's going to enable them to do the best, which is the job of the manager in my mind. So I love him and I want them to win.
Do you think United have got a chance?
I'll say no. I don't think so. I don't think so. They're on a hot run of form. They've had some good games. Rashford's obviously crazy good, but Casemiro has been a revelation. But I think it's probably a stretch too far at this point.
Therefore, I want City to win it because they're not called Arsenal. Luke, thank you so much, mate. Where can everyone follow you on the Bird app and plug any stuff you do, mate?
It's at @FF_Scout_Luke. And yeah, I do a pod called Inspected Goals with Sam, who's on Twitter as well, every now and then. I think the handle for that is just @Inspected Goals with an I for Inspected Goals. We do that most weeks, not all the time, when we can be bothered, essentially. So yeah, if you want to tune in and hear more, then feel free.
You do also occasionally release small bits of audio on City specifically as well, don't you?
Yeah, every now and then when I think it's like everyone's looking at the team for whatever reason, double game week, or the assets are in demand, then I'll do a pod because it's a lot easier for me to respond to a million DMs essentially. That's why I do it. Again, it's selfish reasons. I'm just lazy. I think I'll record a pod instead of respond to everyone individually.
Look out for them. 10-minute audio is definitely easier. As here you go, rather than replying to everyone. I quite agree. I can't emphasize enough. I think Luke is very much a must follow on the Twitter app. Please take note that it is predictions. Luke is not ITK. He does not have a direct line to Pep and does not know who he's factually going to play. Luke, please come and join me soon for a Sky podcast, mate.
Yeah, we'll do. I look forward to that. My Sky season's gone off a bit of a cliff like yours with the Man City load up, I think. But Again, we'll do it again, right? We'll do it again.
Yeah, I would. Exactly what you said earlier. Same with Sky. If I'd have gone back, I'd have done exactly the same thing again. Exactly that. Brilliant. Thanks so much, Luke. Suj will be rejoining me for the Sky Fantasy Football Podcast tomorrow. Just leaves me to say thanks again so much to Luke. Cue music, please, man child.